Have you ever known someone who earns really well, pulls in an enviable salary, lives in a nice neighborhood, drives a brand new car, and yet at the end of the month, there's absolutely nothing left over? Maybe you recognize yourself in that situation. And the most intriguing part is that this person isn't irresponsible. They don't throw money away in obvious ways. They don't gamble. They don't have expensive vices. They simply work, earn, spend, and the cycle starts over. Every single time, month after month, year after year. There's a very specific reason why this happens, and it has nothing to do with a lack of discipline or intelligence. It has everything to do with the way the brain was programmed to relate to money, and the programming happened long before you had enough awareness to question it. In this video, you're going to discover 7 invisible mental patterns that work like traps inside your own mind. These patterns have been identified by behavioral psychology and financial neuroscience, and they explain why highly intelligent, hard-working people remain stuck in a cycle of earning and spending without ever building real wealth. You're going to understand where these patterns come from, how they operate silently in your everyday life, and, most importantly, what happens when you start deactivating them one by one. I'm not going to sell you a magic formula. I'm going to show you something far more valuable, the map of the mental landscape that is being used against you. Because once you see that map, it becomes much harder to keep being manipulated by it. Stay until the end. Each pattern I'm about to reveal is more surprising than the last. And at the end, I want you to tell me in the comments which of these patterns you recognized in yourself. Let me tell you about Dr. Marcus. He's an attorney, 48 years old, worked his entire life to get where he is, and brings in around $15,000 a month. When he first came to me, the very first thing he said was, "I know it sounds absurd, but it's impossible to save money with the life I have." And he was right about one thing. It did sound absurd, but he was completely wrong about another. It wasn't impossible. It was inevitable. Inevitable given the set of mental patterns that governed every financial decision he made, often without him even realizing he was making a decision at all. Because that's exactly what mental patterns do. They make certain choices so automatic, so natural, so obvious, that a person never even considers they could act differently. Dr. Marcus wasn't spending his money was being drained through 7 invisible holes he had never stopped to identify. And throughout this video, you're going to discover exactly what those holes are, because there's a very real chance that some of them exist in your life too. The first pattern we identified in Dr. Marcus is one of the most common and at the same time, one of the least recognized. Psychologists call it the identity consistency bias, but I'm going to explain it in plain language because that technical name doesn't capture the brutality of what this pattern does to your wallet. The identity consistency bias works like this. Your brain creates an image of who you are, what your standard of living is, what your social status looks like. And then it works tirelessly to keep that image consistent, even if doing so costs you your financial health. Dr. Marcus had spent 20 years building a very clear identity. He was the successful attorney, the respected professional, the man who had made it. And that identity carried an extraordinarily high maintenance cost. The office on the premium floor of the most modern building in the city. The imported car traded in every 3 years. The expensive dinners with clients and colleagues. The designer clothes that projected credibility. Each of those expenses, taken individually, had a reasonable justification. But together, they formed an identity maintenance system that consumed most of his income before he ever got around to thinking about saving. What neuroscience has discovered about this pattern is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. When you act in ways that are inconsistent with the image you hold of yourself, your brain activates the same regions associated with physical pain. This is not a metaphor. It is literally painful for your nervous system to appear as less than who you believe you are. And companies know this. The luxury industry doesn't sell handbags and cars. It sells relief from identity pain. It sells the feeling of continuity between who you believe you are and how the world perceives you. And when you start to understand that, you begin to realize that every status purchase you make isn't a rational choice. It's an automatic response to a very real neurological discomfort. The question that's worth its weight in gold here is this: what is the monthly cost of your identity? How much do you spend every month not to live well, but to appear to be who you believe you need to be? If you add up those expenses honestly, the number is going to surprise you. The second pattern is equally powerful, and it has a name you've probably heard before, but never quite in this financial context. It's called hedonic adaptation, and it's one of the cruelest mechanisms the human brain possesses. Hedonic adaptation is our tendency to adjust quickly to any improvement in our living conditions. You achieve something you deeply desired, a bigger house, a better car, a higher salary, and you feel a genuine, intense joy. But that joy has a short expiration date. Within weeks or months, that new standard of living becomes your new reference point, your new normal. And what was once a dream becomes an obligation, and what was once a source of gratitude becomes the bare minimum you'll accept. Dr. Marcus clearly remembered the day he signed the contract for his first luxury car. He felt on top of the world. 6 months later, it was just the car. 2 years later, he was already eyeing the newer model because his was falling behind. This isn't being spoiled, it's pure neurology. The financial problem with hedonic adaptation isn't simply that you get used to what you have. It's that your desire threshold keeps rising even when your income doesn't keep pace. Studies conducted at Princeton University showed that above a certain income level, which varies depending on the country and local cost of living, increases in income produce progressively less increase in actual well-being. But spending keeps growing because the adaptation mechanism creates a psychological treadmill. You run forward, but the finish line moves at exactly the same speed. And this treadmill is especially cruel because it's invisible. You don't realize you're on it. You just feel like things have gotten more expensive, or that money doesn't go as far as it used to, when in reality, what happened is that your reference standard went up, and with it, all of your automatic, unnoticed, unquestioned spending. Now think about this with me. Do you remember how much you spent 5 years ago? And what your income was 5 years ago? If your income grew, but your ability to save didn't grow proportionally, or actually got worse, you're experiencing hedonic adaptation in real time. The good news is that the same mechanism that traps you can be redirected. When you learn to create conscious distance between what you feel and what you do, you begin to break the adaptation's autopilot. But that requires understanding the third pattern, which is perhaps the most sophisticated of all, and the one that the modern financial system exploits the most aggressively. This third pattern is what behavioral economists call mental accounting, and it was one of the concepts that earned researcher Richard Thaler the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017. Mental accounting is the human brain's tendency to categorize money differently depending on how it was obtained, where it's stored, or what it was earmarked for, even though, objectively, a dollar is always worth exactly $1. Let me give you an example that's going to sound very familiar. When Dr. Marcus received an unexpected bonus from a client, say $5,000 beyond what he anticipated, he didn't treat it the same way he treated his regular salary. His salary had serious destinations: rent, his kids' school, groceries. The bonus was extra money, and extra money doesn't count the same way. With extra money, you go to a nicer restaurant than you normally would. With extra money, you buy that item that's been sitting on your wish list. With extra money, you take the trip you've been putting off. That $5,000 bonus would evaporate in 3 weeks. And Dr. Marcus always had the feeling that he'd enjoyed the money, that he'd made good use of it. But he hadn't built anything with it. What makes this pattern so powerful is that it operates with a completely coherent internal logic. You're not being irrational within your own reasoning system. The problem is that your reasoning system was built on flawed premises. The premise that money from different sources has different value, that money earned through hard work deserves more care than money that came easily. Financial behavior research shows that people spend money received as gifts, bonuses, inheritances, or winnings an average of 40% faster than money received as a salary. 40%. That means a significant portion of the wealth that could be accumulated over a lifetime simply disappears because the brain filed it in the wrong folder of its internal accounting system. And if you think this pattern doesn't affect you, answer me this. When you pay with a credit card, does the pain of paying feel less intense than when you use cash? If the answer is yes, and for most people it is, you are experiencing a specific form of mental accounting. Money on a card doesn't feel as real as a bill in your hand, and that difference in perception carries a measurable financial cost. Studies from MIT showed that people are willing to pay up to 100% more for the same item when paying by card instead of cash. 100%. Double. And that's not stupidity, it's the brain functioning exactly as it was programmed to function. The problem is that this programming wasn't done by you, and it was definitely not done with your best interests in mind. The fourth pattern is where things get even more interesting, because this one has to do not with how you spend, but with how you think about the future. Psychologists call it hyperbolic discounting, and the best way to understand it is with a simple question. Would you rather receive $100 right now or $150 1 month from now? Most people, when they answer honestly, prefer the $100 now. Mathematically, that makes no sense. $150 in 30 days represents a 50% monthly return, something no investment in the world consistently offers. But the brain doesn't think in terms of rate of return when it faces that choice. It thinks in terms of certainty and immediacy. The pleasure now is real. The pleasure in the future is hypothetical. And the primitive brain, which was shaped by evolution to prioritize immediate survival, aggressively discounts everything that lies in the future. It literally sees the future as worth less than the present, even when the numbers say otherwise. Hyperbolic discounting explains a whole range of financial behaviors that seem inexplicable by conventional logic. It explains why people make detailed savings plans to start on Monday and never actually start. It explains why we sign up for 12-month installment plans without calculating the impact on our future budget. It explains why we pay the minimum balance on a credit card, which is mathematically one of the worst financial decisions possible, because it relieves the immediate pain of paying the full amount. Future, you will always fix the problem. Future you is wiser, more disciplined, wealthier. The problem is that when the future arrives, you are still the same you, with the same brain, the same patterns, the same hyperbolic discounting running at full speed. Doctor. Marcus had a retirement plan he was going to start as soon as he finished paying off the car. When the car was paid off, the home renovation came up. When the renovation was done, the kids' college tuition appeared. The future always stayed just a little further ahead. There's a fascinating study conducted by economist Shlomo Benartzi that revealed an ingenious solution to hyperbolic discounting, and it works precisely because it doesn't require you to overpower your own brain by sheer force. The experiment, called Save More Tomorrow, offered participants the opportunity to automatically increase their savings contributions each time they received a raise in the future. Not now. In the future. And the participation rate was extraordinary because committing future money doesn't activate the same level of resistance as committing today's money. The future doesn't hurt the same way. When Dr. Marcus applied this principle, setting up automatic investment increases tied to each new contract he signed. Within 18 months, he had saved more than in the entire previous decade. But before we get to the solutions, you need to understand the fifth pattern, because it's the one that turns all the others into a closed system, almost impossible to escape without very specific awareness. This pattern is called loss aversion, and it was discovered by researchers Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, work that also earned a Nobel Prize in economics. Loss aversion describes the fact that the suffering caused by losing something is approximately twice as intense as the pleasure generated by gaining the same thing. Losing $100 hurts neurologically twice as much as gaining $100 feels good. That might sound like a harmless curiosity, but the implications for financial behavior are profound and devastating. Think about this. When the stock market rises 20%, you feel a moderate sense of satisfaction. When it drops 10%, you feel a panic that seems disproportionate, And you often sell your investments at the worst possible moment, locking in a loss that could have been only temporary. Loss aversion explains why people keep money in low-yield savings accounts with returns that don't even keep pace with inflation. Because the idea of not losing is more powerful than the prospect of earning more. It explains why we keep paying for services we don't use. The gym membership, the streaming subscription, the club dues. Because canceling feels like a loss, even when keeping it is clearly worse financially. It explains why it's so difficult to sell a property for less than you paid for it, even when holding onto it is expensive and the money would make far more sense somewhere else. In each of these situations, the brain is optimizing to avoid the pain of loss, not to maximize gain. And that optimization carries a silent cost that compounds over years. What is especially cruel about loss aversion is that it also operates in the opposite direction from what you'd expect when it comes to risk-taking. When people are in gain territory, when they're ahead, they become risk-averse, preferring to protect what they have rather than risk it for more. But when they're in loss territory, when they're already behind, they become willing to take on much larger risks in an attempt to recover what they lost. This means that most people are most cautious exactly when they could afford to take more risk, and most reckless exactly when they need to be most careful. Casinos know this, brokerage firms know this, consumer marketing knows this, and they design their systems to exploit exactly this pattern of behavior. Now we arrive at the sixth pattern, and this one is particularly important for anyone over 35 because it intensifies with time and with the accumulation of experience. It's called financial confirmation bias, and it works like this. Once you form a belief about money, whatever that belief may be, your brain actively begins to filter the information around you to confirm that belief and discard anything that contradicts it. If you believe that rich people are rich because they exploit others, your brain will find evidence of that everywhere and will ignore the cases that contradict that narrative. If you believe that investing is only for people who already have money, every time an investment goes wrong for someone you know, that belief will grow stronger. And every time someone builds wealth through investing, your brain will find a reason to dismiss the example. Confirmation bias is especially dangerous because it creates a cognitive immune system. It protects your financial beliefs from any information that could change them. And that means the person who most needs to shift their financial mindset is exactly the person who will encounter the most internal resistance when they try to do so. Dr. Marcus held a deep belief that to make money, you have to work hard. That belief wasn't wrong in itself, but it carried a devastating hidden consequence. He genuinely couldn't believe that money could work for him. Every time someone mentioned investing, he would listen, agree on the surface, and then find a reason not to act. The market is too unstable right now. I need to pay off this debt first. I'll wait for a better moment. Confirmation bias was building an invisible wall between him and financial freedom, and the wall was made entirely of his own beliefs. How do you break confirmation bias? The answer isn't simply seek out different information, because if you seek information through the same mental filter, you'll select only what already confirms what you believe, even within a new source. The key is a practice called deliberate counterfactual thinking, which is essentially forcing yourself to build the strongest possible argument for the view opposite to your own. Not to agree with it, but to understand where it has valid points that your mental filter was discarding. When Dr. Marcus was challenged to write the most convincing argument he could in favor of investing in stocks, something he had always avoided, something interesting happened. In the process of building that argument, he encountered information he had genuinely never processed before. Not because the information was new, it had been available all along, but because for the first time he was seeking it out without the confirmation filter in place. And that brings us to the seventh and final pattern, which is, in many ways, the most fundamental of all. Psychologists call it an external locus of control in relation to finances, and it functions as the glue that holds all the other 6 patterns in place. Locus of control describes where a person believes the power over the events in their life resides. People with an internal locus of control believe their actions have a direct impact on their outcomes. People with an external locus of control attribute their results primarily to external forces, luck, the government, the economy, family, circumstances. In the financial realm, an external locus of control shows up in phrases you've certainly heard before, or maybe have said yourself. It's impossible to get rich honestly in this country. Inflation eats everything away. Anyone who has money either inherited it or cheated someone. The government takes it all in taxes. These statements aren't necessarily false in every respect. Economic context does matter. The problem is when they become the complete explanation for someone's financial situation, because at that point, they eliminate personal agency entirely. And when personal agency is eliminated, behavior changes in very specific and harmful ways. The person stops learning about personal finance. What's the point if the system is against me? The person stops making long-term plans. There's no use planning in a country like this. The person stops investing consistently. The market is going to crash anyway. In each of these cases, the belief in external control produces behaviors that confirm the belief. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Dr. Marcus had a very articulate and sophisticated explanation for why it was impossible to build wealth in America at his income level. And he used real data, real examples, genuinely intelligent arguments. The problem was that this narrative served as a perfect shield against any personal responsibility for his financial decisions, and as long as that shield was in place, nothing could change. Researcher Carol Dweck from Stanford University spent decades studying what distinguishes people who grow and learn from those who remain stagnant, and the most powerful conclusion of her work is that the most important variable isn't intelligence, isn't talent, isn't social background. It's the belief about whether things can change. People who believe they can grow, what she called a growth mindset, respond to failure and obstacles in completely different ways from people who believe they are fixed, determined by factors outside their control. And that difference in belief produces differences in behavior that over years result in differences in outcomes that seem miraculous to outside observers, but are simply the compounded product of different choices made consistently over time. When Dr. Marcus began working through these 7 patterns, not all at once but one by one with awareness and specific tools, the results were gradual but consistent. In the first month, he identified how much of his monthly spending was identity maintenance and found nearly $3,000 in expenses he was paying, not because he needed them or because they brought him genuine pleasure, but because they corresponded to the image of who he believed he needed to be. In the following months, he began to notice the hedonic adaptation treadmill and started making conscious pauses before any lifestyle upgrade, not to never improve his life, but to ensure that each improvement was a deliberate choice, not an automatic response to the discomfort of having less than his peers. He restructured his relationship with bonuses and unexpected money, creating a simple rule. 50% of any unexpected amount goes directly into investments before it ever touches his checking account. He reprogrammed his relationship with the future using automation, automatic investments that happen regardless of his motivation on any given day. And he began questioning every financial belief he'd held as obvious, asking himself, where did this idea come from? Does it still serve me today? Within 18 months, Dr. Marcus had built a financial reserve of over $200,000 without meaningfully reducing his perceived standard of living. The difference lay entirely in how he had deactivated one by one the 7 patterns that had been silently draining his wealth. And the most revealing thing of all was what he said when he looked back. I always knew, on some level, that something was wrong, but because I didn't know the name of the problem, I couldn't solve it. When I learned to name each pattern, I stopped feeling guilty and started feeling responsible. And responsible is very different from guilty, because responsible means I can actually do something about it. That distinction Dr. Marcus made is perhaps the most important one in this entire video. Guilt paralyzes, responsibility mobilizes. None of the 7 patterns we discussed here is a character flaw of yours. None of them is a sign that you're foolish, lazy, or weak. All of them are predictable neurological responses to an environment that was carefully designed to activate them. The identity bias is exploited by luxury advertising. Hedonic adaptation is fueled by the culture of permanent consumption. Mental accounting is amplified by the easy credit system. Hyperbolic discounting is exploited by zero-interest installment plans and limited-time offers. Loss aversion is manipulated by alarmist financial news and can't-miss promotions. Confirmation bias is fed by the information bubbles of social media, and the external locus of control is reinforced by a system that would rather have you feel powerless than develop genuine financial autonomy. Seeing these patterns doesn't make you immune to them overnight. The brain doesn't work that way. But seeing these patterns creates something that didn't exist before, a window of awareness between the stimulus and the response. And inside that window, even if it lasts only a few seconds, there exists the possibility of a different choice, a choice that, made repeatedly over months and years, compounds in extraordinary ways. Because that is exactly how wealth works, not in dramatic leaps, but in the quiet compounding of small, conscious choices made consistently. And now you have the map. You know what the 7 patterns are. You know how they work. You know they are not your internal enemies. They are external programs that you can begin to reprogram starting today. The question that remains is, which of these 7 patterns did you recognize most strongly in yourself? Which one, as you were listening, made you think, that is exactly what happens to me? Because that identification, that moment of recognition, is the real first step, not the easiest, not the most dramatic, but the most decisive. Write in the comments which pattern resonated most with you and what your biggest financial struggle is right now. I read every comment and personally respond with the most specific guidance for what you're going through. Because every situation is unique, and you deserve an answer that is truly yours, not a generic formula that applies to everyone and therefore to no one. See you in the next video, where we'll keep dismantling piece by piece the mental matrix that separates those who merely earn money from those who truly build it.